Hello, this is Kyra. In this video, we're going to be talking about going from your contracted group quote to the actual contract. This is part 5 in the group's training series. And like we have been in the last few videos, we are going to be talking about contracted groups specifically in this training. So what do you need before you can request the contract? You've got to have all 3 of these things before you go to the groups department to request that contract, right? You've already received the quote. You've been working on that with your client. When both you and the client approve the quote, that is the first sign that you are getting ready for the contract. You're also going to need to know every room and cabin category that you want to include in the contract, the number of each of those and the dates for them as well. We'll go over this in the next slide, but they're going to want to know exactly which rooms you want to contract. And if it's land such as hotel or resort, they're going to want to know the dates. Of course, for the cruise, you know the cruise selected, so the dates are not necessary. And then the last one, this is very important. The client needs to be ready to place the deposit. The contract is going to get signed, and then they're going to have to place the deposit basically that same day, basically right away. So they need to be ready to place that deposit before you even request the contract, okay? You've got to have all 3 of these things before you contact the groups department for that contract. So this is just an example of what they're looking for when it comes to groups and which room categories you want to block, okay? So this is an example. You can see up here, category 1 is the junior suite garden view. So you can contract different dates with different room quantities for the same room category, okay? Now, for a cruise, it would simply be ocean view, 3 rooms, or whatever it may be. But when you have something with a land component, they're going to want the dates. So for this junior suite garden view, the 5th through the 8th, they need 3 rooms, but then they want 2 rooms for a little bit longer time period. This goes back to where we were talking about rooms versus room nights, okay? You know, most people are not traveling for a week, so you probably don't want to contract all your rooms for a week. So you can do something like this to kind of stagger it so you have many room nights available. But if you suspect most people are going to be 3 to 4 nights, most of your rooms should be 3 to 4 nights. For the junior suite Eden pool view room, you can see there's different dates and different numbers of rooms for that category. So this is fully flexible. You can set this up however you like when you are contracting. And then there's one more example at the bottom, okay? So you're going to need this information laid out just as I have it here if you are contracting something like a hotel or a resort. So some things to know, some things I've learned doing groups. All additions and changes after signing the contract are subject to availability and approval. So if you contract 3 rooms and you end up needing a 4th room, then you're going to have to request that 4th room. It is subject to availability and approval by the vendor. So the vendor can choose to deny that request, or the resort or hotel can deny that request. And the price is not guaranteed if it's not in the contract. Now, many hotels and resorts will honor the contracted rate, but just so you know, it could be a different rate if you have to add something on. So anything in addition to what you contract is never promised. It's better to contract more than you think you need. So if you think you need 10 rooms, you want to contract probably somewhere between 12, maybe 14 rooms. But this is dependent on your attrition policies. Very important that you know that attrition policy inside and out, because if you have, a long time to figure this out, it's better to contract more. But if you start to have attrition policies, of course, the no penalty period is great because you can reduce as many things as you want. That's a very great policy, and that's a great sign that you should contract more. But if you start to have attrition policies that say can only reduce 10% of the room nights or can only reduce 20% of the rooms, then you need to know that you shouldn't overdo it when it comes to contracting. So your attrition policies are really going to help you determine how much extra you're going to block. Now, this third one is something that I have learned the hard way. Room and cabin categories that are not contracted in your contract are harder to add on later. So if you're talking about a resort that has 10 different room categories, maybe you've contracted 4 of those room categories because you think that's what people are going to want. Well, if someone wants one of those other room categories, you can put in a request with the vendor, but it takes a lot longer to get that request approved because there are no contracted rates for that specific room category in your contract, right? If you haven't contracted the room category, you haven't contracted a price. It automatically makes it a much longer process. It's much easier to add an extra room to a category you've already contracted than to add a room in a category that's not in your contract, okay? So I recommend blocking, if you think someone might want a room in that category, block just one. It will make it a lot easier. If you do need that one, or if you need a second one, it's going to be a lot easier than if you hadn't contracted it at all. So give your group some options when it comes to their room and cabin categories. This last one, it is actually you, the travel agent, who signed the vendor's contract. The vendor is in agreement with you. You are in charge of making sure that you follow through with the contracted policies, terms, and conditions. That is on you, the travel agent, okay? Very important that you know you are signing the vendor's contract. Now, of course, you're going to send your client a document to sign. So the group leader is going to sign a contract with you. But the contract that comes from the vendor is signed by you, the travel agent, not the group. So step one here, okay, what you're going to start by working with the group department. So you're going to send them the necessary information. That's that slide we just went over with all of the room categories and types, all the information that the groups department needs to make the contract. You're going to send them all of that. Now, just like we talked about in one of the previous lessons, is that you should expect a long turnaround time. This contract could come the same day. It could come 2 days later. Sometimes it could be a week or more. So always call the groups department and say, what is your current turnaround time for contracts? And that's going to really help you give yourself a good timeline and to inform the client of the timeline. But realistically, it could be within the 5 to 10 business day range to receive that contract back. Now you're going to wait, and once you receive the contract back, this is what you need to do. Read the contract and the quote. I recommend you print both of them out side by side. And what is the differences between the two? Was there a comp offered in your quote that's not in your contract? That's something you need to know, right? Because you and your group leader have agreed to the quote. You have approved it. You think it's great. It's going to work for that group. So if something's different, does that affect the group, right? If a comp is missing, maybe the pricing has changed. That's also a possibility. Maybe the price went up on the rooms. Maybe the price went down. Note those differences so that you can inform the group leader, hey, these are the changes that have come since we received our contract. Once you receive it, plan to pay the deposit and sign the contract within 1 to 3 business days. Once you receive that contract, you're going to be doing quite a few things before you sign it. So you're going to need every one of those days that they offer you. But once you receive that contract, notify your group leader and say, hey, just so you know, it's going to be time to pay that deposit in the next day or two, okay? So make sure they are prepared to pay that. So before you sign the contract, you need to review it in detail, right? What are the discrepancies between the contract and the quote? Is there anything new in the contract that you have questions about? You should call that vendor. You should call their group department and ask all the questions you have, just like you did with your quote. It's best to do this on the phone. You can even have this vendor walk through the entire contract with you, line by line, and explain it all to you. That's very helpful. Remember, they are experts on groups, so take advantage of what they have to say, and also, they're there to support you. So make sure you're calling them and asking questions. You also need to send the contract to Archer for review and approval, okay? Make sure you do this step. When you send it to Archer, I recommend giving them a call and letting them know that you have sent it, and ask them for the turnaround time, right? Notify them. If your vendor is giving you 2 days to sign it, let Archer know, because you absolutely have to have their approval before you sign the contract. Now, this is not really necessarily that Archer is going to deny the contract. What Archer is doing is making sure that you're going to get paid and making sure there's nothing in that contract that's going to negatively impact you as a travel agent. So they're there to watch your back, but just know if you're working with a preferred vendor, Archer does groups with them all the time. Most likely it will be approved, but just know that it is a required step. And it is very possible they don't approve it, but most likely they will, because you're working with our preferred vendors almost all of the time. Also, create a branded copy of the contract. Just like you created a branded quote for your client, you're going to create a branded copy of the contract, okay? And you're going to send this to the group leader for their signature. So add a slot for them to sign that. You can even ask them to initial every single page on that contract and send it back to you. But you want to make sure that you have their signature. And this is something you can work on while you're waiting for Archer to approve, right? While you're waiting for Archer to approve, start working on your draft of that contract. It may take a little time to put that together, so start working on that. In the meantime, once you receive Archer's approval, send this contract to the group leader for them to sign and let them know they need to get it back to you immediately, right? We don't have a lot of time here to waste. We need things done quickly. So now that Archer has approved the contract, you've approved the contract, and your client has signed a contract with you, you can sign the contract. Do not go on to step 3, what we're talking about right now, until everything in step 2 has been completed, okay? Do not sign this contract until everything we just talked about is done. But then you're going to sign the contract, and you should be able to place the deposit immediately or later that day. So you're going to do that just like you would any sort of deposit with a client, right? You're going to get that from your group leader, get their credit card information. Just so you know, this deposit can later be applied to a specific reservation in the group. So let's say the deposit is $1,000, and let's say the group leader, their room comes out to $2,000. Once you have that set up, that $1,000 can be applied to their reservation, and they would only have $1,000 left to pay on that reservation. So just know the deposit doesn't just go away. It is something that will be applied to one of the reservations in the group, which you're going to do as the travel agent, but it can go to the group leader's reservation, which is most likely what's going to happen. And then you may have to wait a couple days for the booking reservation system to be ready. Most contracted groups are booked through a specific group portal with the vendor. So they have their own groups area for you to make the reservations into the group. It's possible they need a day or two to set this up. So don't necessarily think you can start booking those reservations into the group the same day, but it will be pretty quick, okay? So those group leaders, we can book their room. Everyone who's coming, we can start book their reservations very soon after we have signed and placed the deposit. So be ready to start making these reservations for everyone who's traveling. So just to wrap up this groups training series, we're going to go step by step through the contracted group process so that we can put this all together on these 2 slides for you. And this is everything we've been discussing through this training series. So the first thing you're going to do when someone wants a contracted group quote is you're going to research. Research is very important. Provide those quick quotes. Look at the price for the FIT individual reservations, add that 10% markup like we talked about, and you're going to work with that group leader until you've narrowed it down to 1 to 2 options, right? Whether it be 1 to 2 cruises or 1 to 2 hotels or resorts, but you're going to do the research until you get to that point, okay? Now, once you have 1 to 2 options, you can request the contracted group quote from the vendor. You're going to provide the information they need. You're going to let them know the 1 to 2 options, and you're going to patiently wait for that that quote, because anytime we communicate with the vendor, we're on their time, we're on their schedule, and they don't always do things immediately, okay? So you're gonna patiently wait for them to send you the quote. When you receive the quote from them, review it in detail, write down any questions that you have, circle anything that doesn't make sense, anything that you need clarification on, okay? And then you're going to address those questions with the groups department. A phone call is the best way to do this. You are going to learn from the group department. I have learned a lot from the group departments that I have worked with because, again, they are the experts on groups. So ask them all the questions you have. You need to understand every line item in that quote, because if your client or your group leader asks you a question, you have got to be able to answer it, right? So you've got to understand it fully. Rebrand that quote with your logo, your business name, your contact information, and send it to the group leader, okay? You understand the contract in full, so you're going to rebrand it, send it to the group leader, and you're going to meet with them to review the quote together. I recommend you meet with them right as you send it, or go over it with them over the phone, or even better, over Zoom, and review that quote together. But you also may need to give them a few days. They may not know right away if that's the right option for them. There may be two options, right? If you have quotes for two options, they may need a day or two to decide between the two options. So you're going to continue to follow up with the group leader, give them a day, give them 2 days, and keep following up until they approve the quote. Now, they may not approve the quote. You may have to go through some of these steps again to get a quote for a different resort or different cruise. That's possible, but hopefully you've done your research well and you get an approval for one of the quotes that you sent them. So keep in contact with that group leader and make sure you are answering their questions as they are making their decision. So then you're going to request the contract, okay? They've made their choice. You're going to request the contract and you're going to provide all the necessary information to that group's department. Again, you're going to wait patiently. We don't know how long this is going to take, but you can always call and ask them for their turnaround times. So you're going to wait to receive that contract. When you do receive the contract, review it in detail, write down those questions. The same thing we do with quotes, we need to do with contracts too. It is important that you understand every part of the contract, because if the client has questions, you need to be able to answer them. So call that groups department and address those questions, okay? Is there any difference between the quote and the contract? Those are the types of things to ask questions about. A lot of times the contract is very similar to the quote. It will usually have very similar comps and amenities, as well as the policies are usually very similar. So most of the time you should have a lot of your questions already answered, but there may be discrepancies or changes between the two that you need to get addressed. So call that groups department and make sure you understand everything fully. Send the contract to Archer so that they can review and approve it, right? And call them and figure out what that turnaround time is, because you don't have a lot of time here, okay? Always better to call and ask and let them know that it is there sitting in their desk for approval than to not call, right? So make sure you get Archer's approval. You're going to rebrand the contract just like you did the quote, and you are going to send it to the group leader for their signature. You absolutely need them to sign your branded version of the contract, because you are the one signing the contract with the vendor, okay? The client has a contract with you, and you sign the contract with the vendor. That's how you cover your bases, is to make sure you get that group leader signature. And then when we get to step 15, you need to complete all the previous steps before you do this. It's very important that you have addressed your questions. It's very important that Archer has approved the contract. And it's very important that you have your group leader's signature before you sign the contract with the vendor. This is to protect yourself, right? So once you get down to step 15 and you sign the contract, everything previous should be completed, no exceptions. Okay, so sign that contract with the vendor. You're going to place the deposit with the vendor, and you will be ready very shortly to book into the group, okay? So that is our step-by-step process when it comes to taking a contracted group from a request from a client all the way through the contract, signing the contract, and booking into the group. So thank you so much for sticking around with me through this 5-part groups training series. I hope you learned something, and I hope this helps you with your next group. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next training.